We're live. It is 7:07. I'm a Bill Jet Airline. Tonight we're going to talk about turbo stuff, and the thumbnail that I have up is, if I remember correctly, and I put this in the description, I think it was a 4G63. I think it was an Evo motor with a big, giant size turbo on it, and as you see, a very good size air-water intercooler. I think they're probably running ice water through that. It made a lot of power. I think I remember talking to the guy when I did the interview, and because I was walking around when I was there running the little Chevy Sprint Turbo, and we set a couple of records with that. And I think that thing was, he said it made like 1,000 horsepower, and I kind of remember it as being an all-wheel drive, maybe a Galant or something. That's kind of what I want it to be. That's how I want it to remember. I'm not sure. Maybe you guys can tell by the photo. I know that I do remember it being a very, very high horsepower deal. And I remember it, and I think that I remember it being something maybe near 200 miles an hour in the standing mile, which is pretty impressive. So it was definitely making lots and lots of power. So it's very impressive. But as cool as that was, and it definitely was, I mean, it's not Chevy Sprint turbo cool. It's just regular kind of, super big power turbo kind of cool. But the question is, you guys know, obviously, from this channel, they do lots and lots of testing on turbo stuff. And one of the comments that I get when I do these turbo things is whether or not I run, like if we run a turbo, we've got a GT45 on a 5.3 or something. I got a max speeding deal or the DNA turbo or whatever. We got that on there, and then I run it, and then we make a change. So we make a change to, let's say we change a different intake manifold, or we change a different camshaft. The camshaft would be a really good example, because then that would make an even bigger change. So we've got a 7-pound spring on it. We've got a manual wastegate controller, and then we run it at whatever the wastegate spring is. Let's say we run it with a stock cam, and then we don't make any changes to the wastegate controller or anything, and then we put another camshaft in it. We run it again, and then something happens. And if you have a manual wastegate controller on there, what will happen normally is, on a turbo application like that, if we put a camshaft in, we go from the stock cam, let's say we were running 7 pounds. It all worked out great. We were running 7 pounds on our combination with the stock cam on our LS. And we put a camshaft in there, put a Brian Tooley Racing Chuck Norris cam or a comp cam or a Texas Speed or whatever, a Chopacabra or whatever. Pick the cam that you want. We put a camshaft in it. Makes more power. Makes 100 or 150 more horsepower at the same boost level, presumably. With the manual controller, if we didn't make the same boost, if, for instance, the boost pressure would come down, which is often the case, and the reason that when you put a bigger camshaft in, that the boost comes down, it's not like a lot of people think, because all the boost is leaking out, during overlap, because you got a cam that has lots of overlap. Whether it did or not wouldn't make any difference. The boost isn't leaking out. There's more back pressure than boost pressure. If any leaking was occurring, it'd go the other way. So that's not actually a thing. But what is happening is, more often than not, is you're making more power, which we see from the dyno. You have more exhaust flow. You have more exhaust back pressure. Even at the same boost pressure, you have more exhaust back pressure because you're making more power. You have to process more exhaust now because you made more power. And then what happens is, because you have more back pressure, now you have more back pressure pushing to open the wastegate. And so you still have the same amount of boost pressure, the spring basically, and whatever boost pressure that spring was set at. You have the signal coming from the intake manifold and the spring, and you still have that. That's still the same, but the other side of it has changed. So now it wants to open earlier. So oftentimes what we see when we put a camshaft in, if we just have a manual controller or no controller at all, we'll see the wastegate open up earlier. So the boost pressure will be lower. So we'll get a good power gain from the camshaft. It will happen at a lower boost, not because it's bleeding out, because there's extra pressure pushing the wastegate valve open. Now, with a manual controller, we can turn the boost up. We're bleeding some of it out. We're tricking the signal. We can get it back to 7 pounds like it was with a stock cam. The problem is that you're not going to get exactly the same curve on both of those camshafts. You're going to get 7 pounds somewhere if that's what you want your peak to be. Now, do you want your peak to be your peak boost to occur at your horsepower peak? Do you want your peak boost to occur at your peak engine speed, like your peak RPM? Let's say we rev it till we go past the power peak and we're on the downside of the curve, but we revved it out to 6,500 and made peak power at 6,200. And then do you want the peak boost to be out there? So with a manual controller, you're going to have to kind of pick that. And like I said, it might not be that it's the same boost curve everywhere. So that's one thing that can happen. But the thing is, and the argument for that is that that's real life. If you were to do that test and you were to do it out in the real world, out in the wild, that's what would happen. That's how it reacts. That's how a turbo reacts. That's how a wastegate reacts. That's how it's going to react when you change the camshaft. It's going to do that. So now the flip side of that, and then we're going to ask, the poll is going to be about this wastegate. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. So I guess we can get the wastegate before I finish my discussion on this. Controller. When you're going to have to think about it a little bit. I'm not going to ask you which one's better. Is an electronic controller better than a manual controller? Well, maybe cost is involved there. But so you're going to have to think about this poll just a little bit, because there's something going on here. Is an electronic wastegate controller a better choice than a manual controller for a real world turbo evaluation? So if you're evaluating your turbo and you want to know, I'm going to change that word turbo. We can't do that. Okay, is an electronic wastegate controller a better choice than a manual for real world evaluation? So if we're testing the camshaft and we want to show what the effect the camshaft does, for instance, would it be better for that combination to have a manual wastegate controller or an electronic wastegate controller? And we're going to talk about the electronic wastegate controller right now. So with the electronic wastegate controller, if you get that working properly, what you can do is theoretically and ideally is have the boost curve exactly the same. Like if we do our camshaft test again, we run the stock cam with our turbo at 7 pounds. The boost response of the turbo is going to come up based on the turbo sizing and the power output of the NA motor and what's going on down low with the stock camshaft. So however that does that, based on the power output and the turbo sizing and how quickly it responds and all of that. And then we change our camshaft. So the camshaft, now we know the camshaft is going to make more top end power. Maybe it loses a little bit down low. Whatever camshaft you choose, it's the same for both of these examples. So then we tried it with our manual controller, but now we put an electronic controller on it. So the electronic controller, it's important to note that it will not change the boost response. It's not going to change the spool, other than at the very end where we might start seeing the wastegate open a little bit. So it can cure that little area right there. But it's not going to add any power down low, so it's not going to make the turbo come up any better. Only right when it's reaching its point where the wastegate would start be opening. A manual controller will hold that closed normally, and so we'll get a bigger spike like right at the end before it theoretically levels off. So with an electronic controller, what we're doing is, instead of just bleeding a boost reference to the wastegate, what we're doing is we're choosing a boost level. And so you can go in and, depending on how it's being operated, you can go in and choose a boost level. You usually have to adjust duty cycle to get it to do what you want it to do, which I don't like about wastegate controllers. I wish that you could just put a boost number in there and then it would figure everything out and just make that work for you. No matter what the power output is, no matter what the amount of wastegate it had to do, I wish it would just do all that by itself. But it doesn't. So, but what you do is, like, you say, I want 7 pounds, and then it's supposed to do whenever the turbo can spool up to 7 pounds, it's then supposed to open and close the gate quickly so that it just maintains 7 pounds all the way across. So you could theoretically, as soon as it's able to spool up, have 7 pounds, have that flat, nice 7-pound curve, both on your stock cam and on your aftermarket cam, whatever you put in there. So that's the benefit of an electronic wastegate controller. The other thing that it's doing, though, in order to do that, is it's obviously manipulating the turbo to do that. So in order for it to have 7 pounds, it's adjusting the opening of the wastegate. So it's opening it or closing it depending on what it needs. It's changing the speed of the turbo of the impeller in order to do that. Whereas with the manual controller, there's not really opening and closing going on there. There might be a little bit based on what's happening with the back pressure, but not like with a manual controller. Manual controller or an electronic controller usually can keep it fairly stable. But some might argue that it's doing that artificially, and you're creating an artificial situation. Should a test like with a camshaft even be regulated by boost? Should we be running it at the same boost? Should we be looking at it in terms of, if this happens to boost, we want that to happen to boost? Should we not worry about that at all and just go, look, why are you only running 7 pounds? Why aren't you running 20 pounds on each of them, or whatever that turbo will do? Because that's obviously, we get that a lot too in the comments. Like, why are you wasting your time doing this? This doesn't matter. You should just go like whatever take the wastegate line and hook it to the top of the turbo, or hook it to the top of the wastegate and just be done with it and just let the turbo do what it will eventually do. That's another train of thought. That's not a lot of testing gets done after you do that. Just that one test. And then we have a spike, and then we could see at what point the motor broke, and we could talk about that. That's not a lot of data. That's less data. It's a little more exciting, I guess it can be argued. But that sort of thing also happens. And sometimes it's not good for the motor. But so my question is, and on the poll, do you think that an electronic controller that manipulates the engine so that we have a fixed boost curve, and so the boost is the same for both things, does that really give us a better overview of what the camshaft is worth, rather than seeing how it changes these other things with a manual controller? Let me know what you guys think up there, and we'll take a look at that. So right now, we got 54 votes. We got lots of people here, though, so I think you guys should take a look. Everybody that's there should get out and vote. 69% saying yes, that the electronic controller is a better choice than a manual version. Interesting. Let's see. So we should have people talking about the electronic controllers now. And I didn't look, but maybe on the thumbnail, I'm sure that he had an electronic controller on that. I did not, however, on the Sprint. We just had a manual controller because we were just interested in whatever the peak boost was. And we were at a point where we were very near whatever the turbo would do. We had it set so the turbo wouldn't basically make any more power. I think we were running it when we were running it at MAXTON, we were running it at about between 100 and 110 horsepower at the tire. We had some runs that would go 120. But we never ran it like that. We never turned it all the way up. I was concerned because it seemed like the clutch was a little iffy when we were doing the chassis dyno testing. So I wanted it to last at least a few runs when we were there, and we probably should have just put a clutch. But I didn't think we had one available at the time because we needed something more than a stock clutch, I'm sure. But so let's see what you guys got going on. Let's see what you guys are thinking about this. The electronic controller help you get torque management once programmed. Yeah, you can do, if they're really good ones, you can get boosting gear and stuff. Given all modern ECUs support electronic boost control, why would you bother with a bleed valve? Sullivan, put an S366 SXE on a 2JZ with electronic boost controller and tell me those short runners are okay. Can't wait until electronic boost is a viable thing. Oh, electric boost, I see. Electronic boost controllers, no need for long intake runners. That's 100% not true. Any gain that you get from an intake runner, you will also get with when you have boost to it. So all the gains that you get, the torque gains that you get from a long runner intake manifold, in fact, it could be argued that the long runner intake manifold will get you to spool up quicker, because an electronic boost controller, like I said, does not change the initial time of spool up. It doesn't change the size of the turbo. It doesn't change the size of the motor. It doesn't change the power output of the motor. All the things are going to determine when that turbo comes on. Like I said, it doesn't matter that you say, look, I want 7 pounds, and you're going to make 7 pounds, and then 7 pounds is all you're going to make. Until it spools up to make 7 pounds, the wastegate controller doesn't do anything. Neither one of them do. If all things are working properly, electronic hands down. I vote electronic. Caveat mentioned above. The Merkur and Turbo T-Bird, both boosts would change depending on the gears. The load can affect the turbo, especially on fairly good sized turbos. You can affect that. Running twin 69s on a 6-liter short runner, still pulling boost on the hit. Well, that statement doesn't change the fact that long runners do what long runners do. They still do. They still work every time. A long runner intake manifold makes more power down low than a short runner does. You can want that not to be the case, but it actually is the case. But if you have enough boost and you're fighting traction anyway, then obviously you don't need any more low speed power. So again, it's you not just talk about an absolute as a long runner, short runner thing. You also have to talk about what you're doing. Like, a lot of applications probably can't put down 20 or 30 or 40 pounds of boost down low anyway. So it wouldn't do you any good to have that if you don't have the traction. Theoretically, the electric controller should allow you to see what the individual part changes do by working the same every time. For a street car, I feel fine with the manual boost controller. Race applications, electric. An electronic boost controller is really cool for drag racing if you need to manipulate boosts, like we were talking about for traction or shifts or things. That's kind of a really nice feature. And I like, it's nice being able to have a consistent boost curve for changes that we make. Like, I like it both ways. I think that they both tell me information, and they just tell me different information, both of which are valuable. The days of standalone electronic boost controllers are over. So you heard it here first. It's official. Boost is way too slow to respond for traction control. I think it'd be harder to do that than it would be to manipulate timing and stuff. Let's see, I skipped down. Will an electric boost control work on my Tesla? No, but a candy belt boosted pump will. Richard, I've been thinking about building an international 392 V8, 4125 bore, 208 intake. People have gotten them to flow 280, so that's enough to make a lot of power. Offset ground to 447. So does it already make 550 horsepower and 610 foot-pounds? So I thought you said you've been thinking about it, but now you're giving me dyno numbers? The old fish tank boost controllers, we like those aquarium valves. anything that will trick it. We've spliced, T fittings in line, just whatever you got to do. You got to make it happen. We've put T fittings then with another piece of hose on the T section, and then, carburetor jets or nitrous jets, just whatever, just so that you can get it to do what you want it to do. Would there be a benefit in road racing stability of boost during the acceleration and back on throttle? What about breaking wheels loose on acceleration? Breaking wheels loose would be a traction problem. That would be too much boost or too much power. But a lot of that is driver, though, unless you have traction control. In my GTIR, we limit boost in first and second and have a delay box ramp in third to protect the gearbox. Jonathan, the stock, the motor's rev limited to 3,600. That seems pretty low. Tyler, I'd really like an in-depth discussion on the full difference between a manual controller setup versus an electronic. What more information do you need? And torque management? So you're talking about a factory ECU then? Anybody want or need an old Grady Profec E01 electronic boost controller? Milo's not in here. Milo's usually, he's in here every morning with me though, but he's downstairs because my wife just came home. I read some stuff about the ring gap, and the L33 has the free floating pins. Yeah, it's got Gen 4 stuff in it. Not sure how much I could push the rod. The rods are fine. We've done Gen 3 stuff way over 1,000 horsepower, so 650 is fine. 650 on a 5.3 is easy. Richard, you have to see the internals of an IHC. I've never seen one. Is it like a tractor motor or something? Black & Decker aquarium pump, just like the unit mentioned in the 1975 movie or 1979 movie Hot Rod. Would you consider hot rodding a diesel? I did that. I had an 08 Dodge Cummins turbo diesel, like a Ram 3500, but not in the engine dyno. We won't do that. Eric from Westech has done some stuff on the chassis dyno. He's got a Jetta or a Passat that he did a bunch of stuff to. It's pretty cool. So my friends and I want to do a sequential turbo setup on a B58T 3-liter BMW motor using a GT35 and a GT45. We want to go electric wastegates for them to have better control when switching turbos. So the getting boost control is not really going to be an issue. I'm curious how you're going to do sequential, how you're going to do the piping, because that's what gets complex when you're having to switch between the exhaust flow and then also the inlet flow and have it not backflow into the small turbo. So it's a little bit of if you look at the inlet system, the discharge setup, and the exhaust setups of like a Supra or like a BMW may have a factory one. I don't know if their twin turbo is sequential or not, but the RX-7 was like that. But there's a lot going on there on the induction systems and stuff and on the exhaust to get it to work properly. Would be fun to hook up compressed air tanks to an air intake and shoot and boost that way. That's already been done. Compressed air supercharging is a thing already. They've already run that a few times at Westech. similar to 2JZ GTE stock setup. Sequential stuff is really cool because if you can get it to work right, the Gen 3 RX-7, one of my favorite 90s cars, I really like those. And it is cool the way that they got, because on that application, a rotary has never been big in the torque department. And so having a tiny turbo spool up and have it be torquey-ish, and then having a bigger turbo to make the big end power. Thanks for Beaumont. Beaumont's in the house. Happy to help. So how's our poll doing? 68% are saying yes, they like the electronic controller better. Where's my manual bleed valve, guys, man? Come on. I'm all about having more information, but I do like when everything was stabilized with that TC1 deal that we had. And I don't think I've ever tried to run it with the Holly, although we obviously can, because we have the same, the Holly will work the same. I think we have a 3-port controller when we're doing it. It's a lot. It's the thing with the turbo, you put all that stuff, you put the stuff up and you're like, oh, that looks pretty good. And then you got to put all the hoses and lines and T-fittings and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, they're just run everywhere. So on YouTube, it looks like a high voltage electric turbo is the next evolution of turbos. That'll be neat if they can actually make that work. The problem is the amount of airflow. So if you have 1,000 horsepower turbo, the amount of power required for the electric motor to process that kind of airflow is a lot. And so that's the thing that they're working with, is the sizing for that electric motor to drive that kind of power. It's like guys wanting electric superchargers. It's the same thing. You can drive a supercharger, but for it to process that amount of air, and on a supercharger, it's even worse because you're losing a big chunk of the power. But you can, they're working on it with better electric motors and then really high voltage versions and stuff. So it's kind of cool, and I hope that it works. The thing is, on most gas motors, contrary to the many, many comments that I get about this, you actually don't want full boost off idle. You don't want it producing that kind of cylinder pressure there, because that's where it's more than likely going to break. The pole is definitely going to shift. It always does. It always seems the trajectory seems to be towards no. I'm running CO2 on a dual solenoid Mac valve controlled by Terminator X. Electronic gate seems so much more simple than a manual gate does. EMD 710 had a centrifugal compressor that was both gear and turbine driven. There was an overrun clutch, so once there's sufficient exhaust energy, it's a turbo only. That would be cool. So somebody's talking about the compressed air deal. The compressed air supercharging, the compressed air supercharger company, these are the guys that used to own NOS, have already run it. They've run it at West-Tech, and they've run it in the car a bunch at the drag strip and everything. And it definitely works. It's just the tanks that are required are big, and the valving and all that stuff is big and intricate and stuff. But it's amazing the power gains that you get, because first of all, there's no parasitic loss at all because all of the work is done to compress the supercharger. You just have the weight. So all that's done off-site away from the engine. So the engine is neither driving a supercharger, which takes a lot, or even driving the exhaust on a turbo, which is little. It's none with the compressed air supercharger. And the compressed air supercharging is ultra cold. You don't have to have an intercooler on it. In fact, an intercooler in this case would be a heating element, because unless you did something to make the intercooler transfer medium colder than the air was that comes out of the compressed air situation or tanks, it wouldn't do anything for it because it's very, very cold when it comes out, like below zero. So you get gains that we normally associate with much higher boost levels. Like they doubled the power at 7 or 8 pounds because you have near zero charge temperatures. And so they're running it with full timing, full NA timing. They're running small blocks and big blocks that they had done this stuff to. And and they were running on an 87 octane too. It just didn't seem to care about any of the normal things that we associate with forced induction. It really was amazing. Compressed air to spin up turbos. That's good. Porsche is driving a generator with a turbo and then driving the compressor with a motor. Psych seems to go contrary to the point you try to make. Is that directed at me? I don't know what point. Was this the comment about the poll? The poll is the comment about the polls is it's always it usually starts out way positive and then goes negative as the night wears on. That's typically what happens with the polls, and I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if the no group like ever wants to jump on that no bandwagon, but that seems to be what happens. It has nothing to do with what the question is and what the answer should be on the question. It's just a poll trend. How many folks took home a new backpack blower after that episode? Would a 1,000 horsepower electric turbocharger or supercharger be possible with a 600-volt electrical system? I'm not an electrical expert. I don't know exactly what the scalability is going to be going from what we would traditionally see as a 12 volt or even a 110 or something, or or 220. But then the thing is, you're going to have to be able to produce that voltage too, or invert it or convert it. Then you have high voltage stuff. So it's all something to overcome, but I honestly don't know exactly what the math is that's going to be to make that. How are they blowing compressed air into the engine? They have a discharge from 2 large tanks, and they have a very custom, very large specialized valve that's computer controlled. I had consistent success on my 86 GLH turbo race car with a Granger valve. The Granger valve is very popular, especially on those. So, Jonathan, you got 3 engines to build: the 392, a Packard 378, or a Mel 430. I've never seen the IH or the Packard stuff. I have seen a Mel 430 at West Tech. That's the only one I've ever seen in person. Not really qualified to answer the poll because you're an all motor guy. All motor. Hello, I was wondering what you feel is the best power to weight ratio block and engine, the highest output to the lightest weight. I don't know an answer to that. I know that with the aluminum LS stuff, you can certainly make 1,500 horsepower. I just don't know how long you can do that. I mean, there are guys out there running drag strip stuff with stock bottom ends that I know are making that much power, and they're doing it with LC9s or L33s. So you can do that. And I don't know about just the block because I don't know where the limit is on some of these block only things when you fix the other things that would normally break before that. So like on an LS, on a stock bottom end, the block is not the weak link. The rod or the piston is going to be the weak link. And then I think you're going to get to a point where you're making so much power or torque that I think what you're going to do is the crank is going to move around. You're going to get catwalk probably with a stock block. And most guys that are in the 15 to 2,000 horsepower range, I think, are going to aftermarket blocks. When the alternator required for that kind of voltage cause large person loss. Yeah, I don't know that it'd be running all the time. I think that sort of electric supercharger or turbocharger deal, I think, would be time limited. Like they do with the KERS things on the Formula One stuff, that you'd get a limited amount of time because you would discharge the voltage pretty rapidly. I would think. I don't think it could be on all the time the way the system is running right now. High five. We have lots of squirrels here. Richard, have you played with the 1UZ, 2UZ? I have not. I've never run one on the engine dyno. The Audi S7 is charging a lithium-ion battery from braking, so they're regenning it to power 48-volt electric compressors. E-turbos is about wattage and power to drive it. So if you have low voltage, you need high amperage. If you go high voltage, less amperage. That's the juggling thing that you're going to have to work on. And the nice thing is we have really, really sharp electronics guys that can do that. But then you also have storage and weight and longevity and how often can we use it, and then the nice thing though is if it's an electric vehicle, you don't have to worry about any of this. you just have that. On the pole, does electric controller include like a Holly? It includes whatever electronic boost controller you want it to have. It's just generic electric versus generic manual. How much power is Cleese running to hit 220 in the El Camino? Probably a lot. That's not a stock block though, right? Isn't that that's a dedicated build motor, right? Have you seen the Aerial Atom electric concept that's using a turbine engine with a turbocharger to actively recharge the hybrid battery system? What is the turbocharger doing on either a turbine engine or as a recharge? I don't understand how. I'll have to look at it because I don't understand how the turbo is part of that recharge setup. Twin turbos is best to have two wastegates, two blow-off valves. Sorry for this question. You can not have two blow-off valves. You don't have to have that. You can have a single blow-off valve. Usually on a twin setup, they're going to merge together, or like in my case, they merge together in the intercooler because we have two in and then a single out. And then we just have a blow-off valve on that single discharge between the intercooler and the throttle body, because that's where the pressure wave is going to start. When you close the throttle blade and the wave hits up there, then you want to get it out as quick as possible. You don't have to have two of them. In fact, it would be better if it's close to the throttle body than being close to the twin turbos on the blow-off valves. But on the wastegates, they're going to be close to on the exhaust side, they're going to be close to the turbos. Which of your books were the most enjoyable to research and write? Probably the first one, and then the first Honda book, I think, were and probably the Honda book, maybe even a little bit more than the 5-liter book. I like the 5-liter book because it was what I was doing at the time. I have a 5-liter. I still have that car that we use for a lot of the stuff. the one that I ran the Silver State and stuff. I'm an original owner, so I like that car. But when I started doing the Honda stuff, it was cool. And also when I got done with the first Honda book, it was the very first book of mine to immediately sell out. So I got a notification from them that the first run had been sold out, like almost before they were delivered. And I said, I don't even understand what this notification is. They're like, yeah, we only print a certain number of these things and they're all gone. They're already all spoken for. And so we're already doing another run of them. I'm like, I guess I'm assuming that that's good for me, that you're going to sell more books. They said, oh, it's a really good thing. So it's nice to get, like, you get checks in the mail for when you sell books. It's nice for the check not to be 50 cents or 60 cents or whatever. It's nice for it to be at least in the dollar sign. Richard, have you done any testing on marine engines? Yeah, primarily on big blocks, but I'm familiar with the wet exhaust and the fact that you don't want to have reversion in the exhaust so that you don't get water up in there. Mild cam timing, they tend to be more toward single pattern cams, but certainly mild stuff. And then fairly, they normally go wider on the LSA also on those. Dave Advisor argues that a flat tappet cam is better than a roller cam. I don't know what he means by that, because obviously nobody that has the option to run a flat tappet cam versus a solid cam, no performer of professional motorsports chooses a flat tappet cam because it's better. The most notable people, obviously, that are running still what I would call antiquated motors would be NASCAR and all of its filtered down stuff. I mean, they had to run flat tappet cams for a while, but then they were ridiculous. They're running them in tunnels of oil, and they're running mushroom lifters and, just everything to get them to work. And a roller cam is just a way better deal for dedicated race motors. Nelson Racing has the nicest looking turbo setups with the mirror image stuff. I agree. Tom does really good work over there. Cletus has an aluminum Rodex block. I thought it was an aftermarket deal. Mullet is Steve Morris did the thing for Cletus, right? I thought that he did. So it's a 481X. Richard, you probably know Chrysler was doing overboost function in the 80s. Reviewers rave about the Engrin shift overboost in Hyundais today. The overboost function in the 2.2s, is that what you're talking about? That's one of the things that I love about the Omni. That's one of my favorite things about it, is the fact that they had they would allow momentary overboost for a period of time for 10 seconds. So the thing, hey, this makes 7 pounds, but we're going to give you 9 for 10 seconds. And then for every second that you drive around where you're not in boost, that's going to recharge back up. So a timer in there. Okay, you're getting back into where you can run all of the boost again. And they did that obviously to save the motor, so that you would, unload the motor and not be running flat out. And so you would unload the motor, give it a chance to cool down, and then obviously even more important on the non-intercooled versions. But on the intercooled versions, they did the same thing. They would just give you more. I think that those were 9, and then they allowed 11, and then they had a maximum ceiling, basically a shutoff kind of thing, of 14 pounds. And for 1985 or even 84, in 84 they were manually controlled, but that was pretty cool stuff. And I salute them for doing that. Hey, we're going to tell you this is what the boost is. We're actually going to give you more. So, more is better. And then when guys, as they are going to do with any turbo car, when we trick the thing and turn the boost up, the engineers go, you guys know what they're going to be doing, right? They're going to be putting aquarium valves on these things, or Granger valves came much later, but they're going to be doing that. So we've got to put some sort of like defense mechanism, countermeasures, I like to call them. We got to put countermeasures in here so that they don't all blow every one of these up by overboosting them. So we're going to put a hard cut at 14 pounds and lower than that on the 9 intercooled ones, I think. Didn't Cletus race against the LT1 guy, the guys from Tick? I keep forgetting the name of that stock bottom end LT1 thing, if it even is that anymore. Richard, does RPM play a part in 5-liter block problems, a 5-liter Mustang, or is the whole block cracking issue luck of the draw? I don't have an absolute answer for you. I don't know. I've seen guys break NA ones that are running at high engine speeds. I've seen guys break turbo ones that are not running high engine speeds, but are running a lot of torque. So I don't know what it is. I don't have an absolute answer. Overboost is 14.7 all the way back to 84. Okay. Shuts the engine down even when the wastegate is mechanical. Okay, cool. David Vizard once polished a cam and gained 20 horsepower. See, I love David. He's a really good guy and he's really sharp. But, and I don't know if I have the whole story, but I just don't know how there's not that much friction in a camshaft where you would gain that kind of power. Now, if you polished it and changed the load profile, maybe there's something there. But there's 20 horsepower and friction is really, really hard to get. My ideal MPG daily would be the 1.9 TDI and a 924. That would be a good combination. The 924 is pretty slippery. I mean, I really like the one that I had. I just wish that I would have put a turbo on it. Grubworm, that was the one I was trying to think of. Yeah, because he went 661 and then Cletus went 5 or 659 or 654, right? Van Nuys, that's out in that area, Terry. That's right. Has anyone ever split a 289 302 block as opposed to a 5-liter? The later hydraulic roller blocks, the 5.0 production blocks are way less and are thinner than the earlier blocks are. I don't know about the 289s, just I know the 302s. Ark, I see you're sticking up for Vizard. His qualifications doesn't mean that he hasn't ever been wrong, and that goes for anybody in the world. Like I said, I love David, and I would argue with him to his face, and I have on many occasions. And just because you have pedigree doesn't mean that you haven't said something that's not accurate. That goes for everyone. Grubworm's now running a small block Chevy. He's not running the Gen 2 LT1. I was in France for work, and they had E85, 95 octane, and 100 octane. Now, is the rating system in France the same as it is in the United States? Because I know in Australia, the rating is different. Their 98 is like our 93. Richard, why worry about running splitting 302 blocks when you can run a 351 with Cleveland heads? You can do a Clevor or just run a 351 Cleveland, although a Cleveland block is pretty hard to find anymore. He seems vindictive. David Visor does. I don't get that from him at all. He's always been really good to me. Let's see. Jonathan has a point on the 351. If you had to pick between the two motors, a 5 liter or a 5.8 liter, the 302 versus the 351, the 351 is going to be better. It's going to make more power, even though it probably would be a little bit heavier. It'd be interesting to see what the short block part of it is. The intake's going to be a little heavier too, because it's going to be a little wider. But it'd be interesting to see what a 351 weighs versus a 302 in the same configuration, the carburetor, an aluminum intake manifold, aluminum heads, that kind of stuff. But a 351 is just going to be better everywhere, and then give you a lot of like power options. And then you're not going to have to worry about splitting the block. Grubworm beat Cletus in the grudge race. Okay, 661 to 666. I thought that I saw that there was a picture of those two together, and I maybe didn't get the whole thing. If nitroglycerin heart medication will make the fuel make your fuel better, yeah, it should, right? So can an older 289 or 302 possibly produce 1,000 horsepower? It wouldn't surprise me that they could. We know the 351 can, because we've done that already, and it wouldn't surprise me. I've never tried it with a 5 liter, that doesn't split, like one of those that doesn't break. I've never tried it with one of those, so maybe it can too, and maybe one of the older ones can. I don't think I'd do it with a 289, because I know that it has a short stroke and it loves to rev. But I think I would do it with the 302 version. Your 944 versus an 85 Corvette, which was quicker on the track. If that question isn't me, I've never had a 944. I had a 924. So that question becomes less of a question when you phrase it that way. A 924 is not very fast. It handled fairly well. This one had good tires and wheels on it, but I think it had stock suspension on it. I don't even think we had shocks or springs or anything on it. The 85 Corvette was a Z51 car, so it actually went around the track really well, even given the fact that that car went 13, like it'd run 1390, whatever the number you would want to dial in, whatever the last number you'd want to dial in, it would just repeat that. The guy that I owned it before I had it used to go, he lived out in Vegas, and so he used to drag race it, and whatever the drag racing is called, where you have to run exactly the number or whatever, that's what he did with it before I had it. Now I took it out and wanted to road race it, which it did very well, because it still had all of the stuff. Bracket racing, that's what he was doing. There you go. I'm glad people are here. Try to find a Mexican block. Yeah, those are good. Richard, can I fit Holley EFI on my 1941 Nakajima? Yes. Does it have a single throttle body or something, or a single carburetor or whatever? That'll all work. All this V8 speech. Has Richard or anybody ever experienced the Volvo 4.4 liter V8? We had an XC90, but I don't remember it having that V8 in it. I actually don't even remember what it had in it. Richard, have you ever had a spiral lock pop out? No, I have not had one just pop out independently. Richard, if you had the money, I would have an offset ground stroker, 392 Stroker Jeep 4-liter, offset ground Packard, and a 306. So that's your wish list. People want me to do a Jeep and the 306, obviously. The 987B that won Le Mans in 91, the 4-rotor deal with the sliding stacks. That's very, very cool. Very, very loud. Should have led to more modern street rotaries. Terry, is there a difference in weight between the early blocks and the later blocks? I'll bet that there is, but I would like to see that. I wonder if Mark Sanchez has an early block that we could just weigh the block. James, what do you think of Vizard's 127 theory about LSA cams? I think it tells you one part of what he thinks about a cam will work. Tighter LSA cams tend to make more average power, but the problem is that they also idle terribly. So if he's thinking about doing this and making a good cam for a race motor, then that works. But lots of people don't want that. Lots of people don't want a camshaft that's not going to work as well with a stock converter, and that's going to mean a different LSA. So any theory that anybody has, whether it's David or myself or Comp or whatever, and you're only focusing on one thing, and you can get your theory to work for that one thing, but that doesn't mean it's universal. There is no universal. Dan, GT40P heads are lighter than E7s? Richard, for a light street car that does track days, 408 Windsor, 2,450 pounds, aluminum flywheel, or a light billet steel one. I don't think you have to work. I think I would put an aluminum one in there. You're going to be at RPM a lot on a. Is this when you say track days, is it a drag race car? If it's a drag race car, I'd use a light billet steel one. If it's a road race car, I'd put an aluminum one in. Have you made any videos on exhaust you like on an LS? Do you mean the exhaust system in a vehicle, or headers, or stock exhaust manifolds, or turbos, or what? I don't know what exhaust you're talking about. If it's exhaust for in vehicles, no, I haven't. I don't test stuff that has been bolted on a car very often. I have done full exhaust on the engine dyno with a Holley setup that they sent. It was a dual 3 or 2.5, I think, with mufflers and everything on it. And I was testing it to see if there was a power loss there. And I think for exhaust systems, for most people, surprisingly enough, a lot of people choose cams like this too. They decide on the sound that they want. So if you like it and it doesn't drone when you're driving and that it sounds good, like my truck has some kind of muffler on it that's some random muffler shop put on it, and it sounds pretty throaty. So guys pull up and they want to race. I'm like, dude, it has 300 and something thousand miles on it, and it's all stock, and I already broke the transmission in it once. But because it sounds like that, it sounds, pretty racy, I guess. But that's all just that one muffler. All the rest of the stuff is stock. In fact, the exhaust is really hacked together on this thing. They've multiple welded it. It looks like they've put converters and stuff in this before I got it. Do you need an alcohol sensor on a Gen 3 6-liter when running straight E85 all the time? No, you don't. Just injectors and a fuel pump. You mentioned in previous videos that you have done tests of higher ratio rockers on intakes or exhaust only. Yeah, we've done intake. We've done intake only, exhaust only. I've done individuals and both of them on different runners and stuff when I was doing the Engine Masters testing. And there are no absolute results. Sometimes rockers help power. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes just the intake does. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the exhaust does. Sometimes it doesn't. You have to test it. So I can tell you if your combination is stock and like on an LS, which tends to want more camshaft, if you put rockers on it and you change the ratio, not just the go to a roller rocker, you'll normally pick up power. But you're gonna also have to change the springs because a roller rocker on an LS is going to run into valve float. I use Teflon buttons in VWs. They're a lot easier. Turbo from a Super Fortress. The K code, the Hypo 289s had thicker webbings in the block. They were actually different blocks than the standard ones. I've seen your turbo kits. You expect us to believe your exhaust is hacked up? It's full hack. It's full Hackosaurus Rex. Cherry bomb mufflers make great bench racers. Yep. So we're going to close out our poll. We have 68% saying yes. It seemed like it didn't change. We didn't have a transition more toward the no side. Maybe they heard what I said. Is an electronic wastegate controller a better choice than a manual one for real world evaluation? 68% saying yes. So they like the electronics. I passed up a barn find 65 Mustang fast. Ooh, a fastback K code. That'd be good. I had a notch. Mine was a 65 Hypo 289 K code matching number thing, 4-speed pony interior. It was, it was all this stuff. 411s, I think. Scott, if you run turbos on 210-pound injectors, those are big. Perfect for 85. They certainly flow enough to make lots of power. All the buttons all the time. 2 more minutes. So the Hypo 289 was just better all the way around, right? Getaways here. And the 289 did have that did have a solid cam. So then the question is the Boss 302 cam the Hypo 289 cam, but with different ratio rockers because the Cleveland has a different ratio than the Windsor does. And on that note, it's time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up, and I will see you all in the morning. Boom.